Hi everybody, so this video is about intervals between row forms. So what I have here is I've come up with a hypothetical P row, prime row, and notice that I labeled it P8 because the first pitch class is 8. So I just made this up. So you'll notice all 12 pitch classes are there. And then what I've also done is I've written down the ordered intervals in between each note, each adjacent note in the row. So take one moment and look at this. Okay, now let's see what happens when we create an inversion row. Okay, now I've written down an I row, and I chose to use I8, so I started with 8. What I want to show you here is what happens to the intervals. So you'll see basically what happens for the intervals compared to P is that I has complementary intervals in the same order. So every interval in P gets replaced by its complement because those are the inversions in terms of intervals. So instead of 10, I have a 2. Instead of 3, I have a 9, and so on. And this gives me yet another 12-tone row. So that's what happens with the I row. Okay, let's see what happens with the R row. Okay, so now I've written out R8. So remember with R, all I did was I wrote P8 backwards. So remember, when you're labeling a retrograde row, you always label it by the last pitch class, or you're basically labeling it by what row it retrogrades. So R8 is the retrograde of P8. Anyhow, back to the issue of intervals. Now you'll see that compared to P, retrograde is actually the most different. What it does, it has complementary intervals, but in a reverse order. So what I usually do is I just remember that retrograde is the most different from P, which might be kind of counterintuitive. So retrograde, complementary intervals in reverse order. So take a look at this now. Okay, and let's now go on to the retrograde inversion. Okay, so here is Ri. Just to mix things up, I've used Ri4. Don't worry about how I did that yet, but here was an example of a retrograde inversion row. And compared to P, if we're looking at the intervals, we see that it has the same intervals in reverse order. So same intervals, reverse order. So retrograde inversion, even though it might seem to be the most different from P from an interval standpoint, it's not as different as the retrograde row. Retrograde is most different. Okay, so to summarize, inversion complements in the same order. Retrograde is going to have complementary intervals in reverse order. And retrograde inversion will have the same intervals in reverse order.